News. We're joined now by Craig Barrett. He's a former Intel chairman and CEO. He joins us live from Washington this morning. Craig, I remember when you were running Intel and you came out and you said at that time you could staff the company and not really even have to hire an American and be as competitive as you could at that point. Right now we're looking at the College Board warning that U.S. colleges, in terms of the rate of graduates, has fallen to the number 12 spot. How do you fix this?
Well, there's no silver bullet to fix the education problem. The real challenge is we've been warning about this problem since the early 1980s. We've been 30 years into this exercise of saying our K through 12 system is broken. We have too low expectations. We're not getting kids interested in math and science. There's a whole litany of problems. We just haven't done anything about them.
Well, we haven't done anything. I know President Obama says he wants to increase the rate of college graduation. He wants to get from the number 12 spot up to the number 1 spot by 2020. But how do you do that? I mean, is it a matter of funding? Is it a matter of just consolidating educational standards?
We already spend more than anybody in the world on education. If you look at every positive education system around the world, every successful one has three basic features. It has great teachers, it has high expectations of the kids, and it has a good feedback loop to help teachers or kids that are struggling. If you look at the United States, we draw our teachers usually from the bottom 25% of our college graduates. Most folks who teach science in our high schools are not graduates of science, not accredited. Only 2/3 of the people who teach math are accredited. We have the lowest expectations in the world of our students. And every time we put a feedback loop in place, like No Child Left Behind, it gets politicized. The teachers' unions complain about being measured, the insult of being measured. Administrators complain about it, the insult of being measured. We're not facing reality in any of these topics. We're really 0 for 3 in the characteristics you need for a solid education system.
But there seems to be a real, divorce here, because as we said, we've got all these, business minds, corporate leaders out there saying this has to be fixed in the immediate term. And then what you're describing brings me to, the Michelle Rhee experience in Washington, where you have a reformer who's trying to institute ideas and yet doesn't get union or public support. So how do you compromise that without public support?
Well, you need public support. You need public recognition. The real challenge is in 1983, a Nation at Risk report came out saying this is a disaster. The governors in the early 1990s said this is a disaster. The Glenn Commission in the late 1990s says this is a disaster. The National Academies in 2005 said this is a disaster. The National Academies just a week ago issued an update to the report of 5 years ago saying it's worse than it was when we issued the report 5 years ago. You've got all of the warning signals. We just have not responded. We are kind of wishing we'd go back to 1980 when there wasn't a challenge.
Craig, I know you've actually recently been speaking about outsourcing. You say, Congress has it wrong to think that it's American corporations going overseas just, handing out American jobs. They're almost being forced to do so, you say, because the corporate tax rate is so high. If it's at 35%, where does it have to go to bring jobs back to the U.S.?
Well, Margaret, I think there are a couple of things besides corporate tax rate. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. State plus federal is around 40%. If that was in the 20% region, you'd be more competitive. You wouldn't have the disincentive to make investments in the U.S. But don't forget, we've got an immigration policy which Washington, D.C. has not resolved for legal immigration. We have the fact that Washington, D.C. has ignored investment in basic research and development over the last 2 or 3 decades. That means new ideas are being created outside of the U.S. rather than inside the U.S. And we have this education system we were just talking about, which is continuing to plummet in the ranks of its international peers. All of those things add up to incentives for companies to be successful, to be competitive, to make investments outside of the U.S.
John Chambers, the head of Cisco, told me that he's got $30 billion sitting overseas that he would love to have a reason to repatriate here to the U.S. I mean, what helps companies like that bring cash back home?
Well, you saw what happened when we had this temporary holiday and repatriating cash offshore. Basically hundreds of billions of dollars came back. But as long as you have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, people are not going to pay for the privilege of bringing that money back to the United States. They'll invest it offshore. And especially companies like Cisco, Intel, and others, the high-tech giants of the U.S., do most of their business offshore. So investing offshore can be a no-brainer, especially if there are disincentives to invest in the U.S.
Craig, it's so great having time with you. Love to have you back on the program sometime soon. That's Craig Barrett, head of Intel, joining us, former head of Intel there, joining us from Washington.